Hi, my name's Tamara. I'm from QUT Library at Gardens Point. And that's our faculty where we have a lot of the STEM facilities, and a lot of the hardware we definitely have on campus, and it's a small campus. The library is interested in creating some sort of makerspace, hackerspace type of meeting area, but I'm wondering if any of you have experience in trying to make connections either within a bigger organisation or across organisations to try and get that sort of community happening, because we don't have the ability to put them all in the one building.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah. So with my ChessEd project, I mentioned that I was working with the University of South Australia for the glass casting, Adelaide College for the Arts for the bronze casting, Fab Lab for the laser cutting, Fab Lab for the 3D printing, CSIRO for the titanium printing, and a plethora of people. And so I was trying to make that kind of navigation. In my case, I just went up to people and like, "Hi, I'd like to use your equipment. May I please?" And they said yes. From a sort of perspective of how does that best go down, I think it's really important that at a high up level in the organization, and also sometimes in the government, you know, that there's this message that they want different departments to collaborate and that they think that is a good thing. Because I think teachers and people who manage the equipment are often quite happy to let you use the equipment, you know, especially if they think you're doing a good project, but they worry that they might get in trouble. And there's this sort of fear that if I let somebody from a different department, you know, use the equipment and they break something in the same way that someone from our department could, would I be, you know, considered negligent? And so I think it's really important in order to encourage that, to have like insurance policies that cover everyone in the building and not just people who've done, you know, who are taking a course, or to have some way to you know, clear people, you know, if I should, you know, one day burn myself or you know, break something while casting, that I don't sort of leave anyone out in the dry. And I think that needs to happen at an organizational level, and it's sort of, you know, things like insurance, you know, making it cover everybody is a really good way to sort of let everyone relax a bit and be really open to that.
As someone who broke a $60,000 furnace at MIT, I understand their concern, like individual departments with letting other people use their stuff. But it's something that's been concerning me at MIT, that there's a proliferation of these like workshops and stuff, and so there is a lot of duplication of stuff because people want to have their own facilities and they don't necessarily want to open it up to everyone. So I think what's really most important is not necessarily to try and fight against that, because people are always going to want to have their own separate stuff, but just to make sure that people know what's around and who's working on what. And one thing I was going to mention about MITRES, which I didn't, so the one that was all the way to the left of the Makerspace taxonomy, is they have a monthly show and tell. So it's called Meters, and it's on, everyone knows the formula for working out what day of the month it's going to be on, and you can go and see all the things that people have been working on. And so it gives you an idea about what ideas are out there and what resources are available, and then you can, if you need to, do the Jake kind of thing, or I've done a lot of it too, is like go and beg to use a piece of equipment once or twice, you know, and not necessarily have full access to it, but, you know, supervised access to it. So that's where, like, having a central location or a central time or some kind of thing that lets people know, here's where we find out what other people are doing, that's really valuable.
I think also, picking up on the point that everyone wants to have the toys, so everyone wants a printer, but it's what you do with that printer. And do you reinvent the wheel every time you go, how am I going to activate this piece of equipment? How am I going to show people how to use it? How am I going to provide access to the skill set and the understanding of what it's capable of? And I think organisations, large institutions, is opening up access to those materials and saying, you know, especially when the materials lay dormant, because I think anyone who's ever developed a program has probably got literally several filing cabinets worth of programming they've developed. And is it better to hoard it or to release it into the world and let it be part of it? I think that's also as important as the space, because without context, the space is just a room.
I have a past which was in the Media Lab in the 1980s. And after that, we started a curriculum in schools in Canberra, which went from K to 6 on logo programming, which was all well within the capabilities of the children. And the principle behind it was this code literacy. Of course, it's gone west in the last couple of generations in schools, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are, probably Andrew to start, on how urgent it is that libraries start giving access to people who want to learn this literacy.
Yeah, I think it's really urgent. It's funny you mentioned logo because everything old is new again, right? So a lot of the stuff that people are running in the browser now, for example, code.org has this hour of code that they really encourage teachers to take an hour out at a certain time of the year and all do code. So there's a lot of logo-like languages that are being used again. Pencil code, for example, pencilcode.net is basically logo in CoffeeScript. And I just think it's super important, you know, and the thing that's crucial to me is that it can't be there was this old model, it's like, oh, okay, we'll teach people to code by making everyone do a computer class, right? And so no one wants to do a computer class, right? Even the geeks hate the computer class because they're beyond what's going to be in that class. So that just doesn't work. You've got to, I think, build that literacy across the board the way that we're trying to do at Beaver. So I think the need is there. A lot of other people think that too. Again, if you go to code.org, they've got like a ton of propaganda with all these like sports stars, people who've made a lot of money in the tech industry. You know, you've got Drew from Dropbox and stuff like that doing these videos. NBA basketballers saying, hey, code can change your life. Code is amazing. Learn how to do it. So I think that urgency is there, and I really hope that people are gonna step up that.
And one of the key things I think from a library perspective about why code is important is that people need to be digitally savvy. They need to know that Google is code. You know, it is not magic when you type in something and an answer comes up. That answer is different if I type in the same thing in France. So it is an algorithm, it is about code. And I think we in the library world understand how to be digitally savvy. And while we may not necessarily be the age that is digitally native, I'm only speaking for myself here, everyone else I know you're really young, we are digitally savvy, and I think, you know, sort of that's the important thing, because young people are digital natives, but they're not digitally savvy, and they don't necessarily always question what comes up when they type in that question. So I think that's why it's important that people understand code, as well as great problem-solving skills, which we in Australia actually are not very good at.
I was to say, it's also that realisation that we're being curated too. So Google curates for you, Google filters. And I think that digital literacy and the capacity to code and step beyond that walled garden. And sometimes it's all about context, is, you know, we all have our favourite app on our phone that filters our news for us, but where's the raw feed? How do you interpret that? How do you access that in the first place? I think part of that contextual argument for coding lies there as well, is that, you know, be free, know that you're being lied to, or know that there is a spin on it, and being able to then address that if you want or not. Because I think literacy sometimes is about choosing to be ignorant if you really want to. It's a choice, not a...
And I also think it starts in kindergarten. I don't think, you know, it's a language like any other language, and, you know, sort of young people are perfectly, you know, sort of tiny ones can perfectly start working out that if I do this plus this, that happens. You know.
From my perspective, so I'm code illiterate largely, but the chess rook that you all saw was written in code, and I, as well as developing chess rooks and learning to cast, I was picking up skills like trying to get an introduction to coding. So I wrote that in a program called OpenSCAD, where I combined rectangles and circles, and that is all that chess rook is made of. And then, you know, by using some very parametric, like this length plus this length equals the length of this third element, I built the chess rook up into this sculptural form with these motifs that would repeat. And I think that, you know, increasingly design is going to be include code, because design, especially for digital fabrication, will be customized to you, for you, or will have some element that is dynamic. So with my chess rook, I was always calculating how much bronze I need for every change. So I would add in a little archway, and I'd realize, oh, that's going to cost me 5 cents. And this would be a real-time calculation. And I would also, do calculations, how much will the whole chess set take if I continue to add in these kind of features, and how much will my printing time be? And so you can use a very simple code of, the cost is this amount at this rate. And for every cubic centimeter of my model, I need to pay that. It's a super simple code, and, I don't understand code in the same way the other panelists do, but I think it's an integral part of design of the future, is that you need to be able to perform basic accounting and basic interaction between objects. It's not necessarily complex. It might literally just be combining two numbers or charging something at a rate, but in a dynamic fashion that's auto-updating, so that you don't have to always be doing everything. You don't need a spreadsheet. You can be even more direct than that. And I think it's sort of like, rather than having your own accounting tab, you can just make it as a text file output to your design. So I think it's very important for design, at least.
More questions? Yes. And there's one up the back as well. Over this way.
Hi. I was wondering, the 3D printers and the laser cutters sound like two of the biggest, best sort of pieces of machinery we can grab. But I'm going to assume that there's a market out there, there's different types, there's different, like the 3D printers, if you apply just a normal printer requirements to it, you're going to want something that's robust, something that's easy to figure out, something that's hopefully cheap to replace the cartridge of whatever sort. So is there a preferred brand or preferred type that you guys use of those things, or preferred software for creating 3D images?
Well, a lot of it depends on what kind of things you want to do. So the school I'm consulting for just asked me the same question, like, we want to get some of this stuff for the robotic space, what should we get? So what I told them was, with 3D printers, like, robustness costs a huge amount of money, basically. Like, all the hobby printers are not robust. There's not a single one that is in any way. So you might as well just buy, especially if you're giving people their first exposure to it, you might as well get, like, reasonably cheap, reasonably decent ones, and then just learn to fix them. So I recommended, like, people have had really good results with the UPS, and there's a knockoff of the MakerBot Replicator 2, which now I'm blanking on the name of, but it's like a Chinese knockoff of it. You might remember.
Duplicator.
The Forge something? Something Forge. Flash Forge. That's got really good reviews. I haven't used it myself, but based on the reviews and the price, I recommended to get one of those. It's got dual heads, so you can do 2-color printing and stuff. So that seems good to me. I'm sure Jake has some opinions on that matter too. With a laser cutter, again, like, it really depends on your requirements. I usually recommend to people that they get cheap Chinese ones because the price differential is so great that you can afford to just buy extra laser tubes for it for when it eventually, inevitably breaks, which it will. And you're going to definitely know signing up that you're going to have to do a little work to it. So it's kind of like buying a British car, right? You just know that something's going to go wrong and you're going to have to fix it. But, you'll for a school, right, the question is, the difference is like between paying $10,000 and paying $30,000 for one of the, the American-made models that are much better in every respect, but you pay for that. And $20,000 is a lot of money for a school, right, when making a decision like that. So the Chinese manufacturers that I know personally, people have had good results with, Rabbit Laser and Weike, W-E-I-K-E. So that would be my recommendation, unless you have a ton of money, right? If money is no object, then get a Universal or an Epilogue on the laser cutter side.
So we've got an Epilogue Zing in FabLab. We've had no problems with it, so what else can you ask for? As far as 3D printers, there's, literally thousands of new 3D printers that have popped up over the last few years. At one point, I was trying to track Kickstarter campaigns, and there was a new Kickstarter campaign launching a 3D printer every 3 days. So which one's the market leader? It's sort of like a tank of piranhas, and every time you turn your back, there's been a lot of eating going on. As far as the market share goes, there was sort of like 5 big companies I read in a survey recently, and they were sort of taking out 50% of the market, and then on the other side of the market you had like maybe 30 companies all taking a 1% slice. So it's a vicious market. I don't think a clear winner has been established yet. There's a couple of leaders that up, as Zoz mentioned, is pretty good, and they've just taken a price drop, so I think it's down to $6.99 as of about a week ago. So I think that's a good price for a good printer, but I think it's very difficult, and so I would be hesitant to spend too much money when everybody is halfway between knocked out of the race and halfway between smashing everyone else out and becoming supreme king company. So I think there's as well too many companies. It's not viable in my mind to have a new company every 3 days. I'm not an economist, but I think there's probably going to be some market consolidation, as they call it, where a whole bunch of companies, dozens and dozens of them are just absorbed or fail or go bankrupt, and I think that's an extreme risk for most people in the market right now. No one's a safe bet.
I suppose the flip side from the commercial aspects, like we've got 2 MakerBots at the edge. One of them's not working. It broke down yesterday morning. The stepper motor micro switch on the right-hand side just decided, no, I've had enough. So MakerBot, the warranty's not worth the ink it's not printed in. You will end up doing more maintenance to a MakerBot yourself than you would if you built a rep from scratch. And the joy about building a rep from scratch is when that breaks, you know exactly why it broke, and you can fix it. So part of the, hopefully, but I've had more luck with rep wraps than I've had with the commercial printer. I had an up, and when the arm arrived bent, I said to the supplier, so is that covered by warranty? And he said, no, just bend it back into place, she'll be right. $1,300, bend it back into place, she'll be right. $487, I could build a rep wrap that I could bend back into place because I bent it. So I suppose part of my argument would be if you've got the time, the inclination, and someone who's interested is a rep wrap, get the designs online, order the parts are in, and it'll break down as often as your MakerBot 2 will. And I suppose that open market, like we've got a couple of Shapeoko CNC routers, and once you get those sorted out, they're pretty good value, and they're only $700. Not as fine-tuned as a laser cutter, but for kind of routing out skateboards. Awesome.
But again, I think, part of the makerspace whole, sort of theory and philosophy is to make it. So, sort of making your 3D printer and buying the parts gives you a much more understanding of how things work. And that's what we want, everyone to have more of an understanding of how things work. As Mark said this morning, it's no longer that consumer culture, but if we're going to make it, we can make it a bit better. We can have an arm that does a left-hand turn and a right-hand twist if we want, can't we? So it's about, making stuff that fits us. We just have to be brave enough. That's my question, is, it's the courage to actually start when you're not the expert. So if we're just the starter, and remembering in my world, my 20-year-old is still my tech guy, how do we get the courage to start?
I'm a big fan of take something apart and put it back together again. I've not got a tech background, so it was interest versus necessity versus someone saying, hey, do you want a job doing this for a living? And I went, yeah, sure. That's what the internet's for, right? Not this job, but previous jobs. But I suppose but you look back 15 years when this stuff was very embryonic, and when people were starting out in it, we didn't have qualifications. Australian Arts Council footed a bill for an emerging producers in the community putting digital creatives in community context. That was the first time that had been done in Australia, and that was in 2003, 2004. And that's the beginning of community engagement in that kind of digital context. So that, and the growth from that, and that's only 10 years. So it's a kind of, having to learn on the job was a large part of it, and not being afraid to break something. And quite frankly, rewarding people for breaking stuff. I love having a group of 20 kids in a room taking computers apart, and when it breaks, I give them a chocolate frog. Because you award breaking. They didn't stick a screwdriver in and smash it. They just managed to wire the power supply in the wrong way. They never made that mistake twice. But that's an invaluable learning. And as long as they can identify the mistake they made and why, and then learn from it, then that's utterly invaluable. So yeah, it's just take stuff apart, put it back together again, and don't punish people for not being able to put it back together properly.
I think people, the best way to approach this is just to fail faster. Fail as fast as you can, fail over and over, and eventually if you keep failing and you keep trying and you fail, as a guy with a clock did, fail 100 times and maybe you'll get a clock that works. Maybe.
And be joyous in it too.
Yeah.
Don't sit there going, oh God, I failed, celebrate. Get a bottle of champagne and open it.
Yeah.
Seriously, I'm not joking.
You've got to embrace this, to think of it as an iteration, that no design is ever perfect. It's merely just another step in the process, and it might be the last step or it might not. And as long as you've made some tiny incremental progress on your last design, it doesn't matter if there's still a lot of flaws in it. I think that you just got to fail faster, fail sooner, and be at peace with the fact that you will fail.
Yeah, that's the guy in the foundry when I destroyed the furnace at MIT. He called expensive mistakes tuition payments. Right, you learn something from them, and also the motto at the school that I mentioned with the coded curriculum. Their motto is "Make excellent mistakes." Right, so not every mistake is an excellent mistake, but try to make excellent mistakes because that's what you learn from. And I just wanted to say one more thing about cost. When you're buying printers, don't neglect the cost of the materials. So the group that sent me out to India last month. They bought a high-end 3D printer to go along with their cheap hobby ones. It's the same one that these guys have at the Fab Lab, and they're afraid to use it because it's a cartridge-based printer. The cartridges are incredibly expensive, and every job they're like, well, should I spend the money on this or not? And they vacillate, and it just never gets used. So what's the point of that, right? If you can't just take the plunge and use it and have your box full of 100 wasted parts, then what good is it? So that's another reason I recommend going towards the lower end.
Okay, another question here.
Just a quick question about software licensing. Some of the free programs actually do have clauses that say that they can't be used for non-commercial use. But if we're giving it to library patrons, we can't guarantee that it's not going to be for commercial use. So any advice on handling that?
Yeah, not really, I guess, for me. Probably there are people that really are going to care about that, and so there might be stuff that you just can't use once the lawyers get hold of it. They just complicate everything. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what kind of liability you'd be under if someone came into the library and did use it for commercial use. I don't know who's at fault there. I would hope it wouldn't be you, but again, I don't really know about that. But certainly there are lots of options available for people to do their designs on, and the flip side of that is, in the printer space at least, there's a lot of proprietary printer drivers, so you're just kind of limited to what comes with the printer. I always try to recommend open source software like Replicator G, which I showed a clip from in my presentation. That's one of my beefs with MakerBot, is they've moved away from the open source model. So if you can get away with it, I would say do it, but you're probably going to have real lawyers look at that stuff.
Look at your duty of care. Did you tell people that that particular license was for non-commercial purposes? You need to get proper legal advice, but previous legal advice is make sure that you have given the opportunity for informed consent and informed decision making, and don't gloss over it. Some people do that. They kind of go, no, she'll be right. And it's like, welcome to litigation.
So I'd probably go with a plausible deniability kind of route, but I think there's a second thing, and my experience in Fab Lab is that closed source software just doesn't end up being the dominant player in a place like Fab Lab, because people who come in have no experience, so they're not going to fork out even $10 or $100, or with these CAD packages, you're probably talking tens of thousands of dollars. And they just, you know, who's going to do that for a project they don't even know if they want to do? So, you know, we in Fab Lab are just using open source alternatives for everything, and they've become the dominant way to do things. And now when someone comes in Illustrator, we have to sort of search around the lab. Who actually knows how to use the Adobe suite? Like, we're used to like the crazy quirks, and you know, the really nice thing about, like, for example, Illustrator is you can print straight to the laser cutter. But it was unknown for months because we'd been used to going through this like complex, crazy tool chain where we'd save as PDF and then open it up. But that's because open source is all that anyone can ever afford. So it's all that ever gets used, and it's undemocratic to use expensive software. And I think that's, you know, we mentioned, like all of us have stressed how important it is that you should be able to fail, and you should be able to fail for you know, very cheap, and you know, there should be no barriers to entry, and having that litigation and that cost and that fear, am I doing something dodgy here? It's a barrier to entry, and I would opt away from it entirely.
One more thing that I just thought of, my experience with entrepreneurs working on commercial products like MIT, for example, is that they are way more cautious about legal stuff than you are, because at least how it works at MIT is if you use any MIT resources in developing a product, MIT, you know, has some ownership of that. So people who have something they think is going to be a big commercial product are really careful to avoid using anything where someone might have a litigation claim against them later as having contributed to that project. So that may take a lot of the heat off you, because if people are informed, they'll make appropriate decisions.
And also picking up the point Jake made about open source is that someone comes into your lab, uses your computer, what are they going to do when they go home? Like, can they, like, I love open source because I can give them a USB stick and say every program today you use in this space is on that stick, go forth and make coolness. Or, you know, pulling together a custom spin-up of a Linux installation with all the software there, so they can just put a CD in the drive at home and off it goes. And I think that for the democratizing of this platform is that they're putting the tools into the hands of the people quite literally, to no matter where they go, they can do it and come back into your space. So then you're also not creating a codependence.
And I think it's really important, because the value of libraries is that we share stuff. So we should be having stuff that can be shared, you know, sort of, so that, you know, put the criteria around it that can be shared too. I'd like to thank Daniel, Jake and Zoz, so please put your hands together.